Greetings! Welcome to my channel, Through the Lens of History. This channel will be discussing historic figures and events, learning history through a lucid and accessible approach. In this channel, we hope to comprehend history to the greatest extent and exhibit the fascination of history to the public. Just a kind reminder to this channel before the start. This channel only aims to learn about the facts in history and appreciate the charm of history. All the comments in this channel are not supposed to be elaborated and inaugurate any kind of quarrel. So please be critical and remain calm when you hear ideas that oppose yours. Everyone's interpretation on historic figures and events have the right to remain different, but please stay rational. In today's podcast, we'll be discussing Park Chung-hee. Is he an absolute dictator or the main contributor to the rise of South Korea? What first struck me about Park was his appearance, a face imbued with a sense of solemn authority, and eyes sharp as an eagle's, gazing into the future with a depth that seemed immeasurable. This distinct visage evoked my curiosity. Historical figures often seem to possess a certain extraordinary quality from birth, and Park Chung-hee was no exception. From the outset of the video, I was struck by the circumstances surrounding his birth. He was the seventh child in his family, yet they were so impoverished that they could not afford to raise him. As a result, his mother made several desperate attempts to terminate the pregnancy. She jumped from a height, ingested concoctions believed to induce miscarriage, and fell heavily onto the ground. Remarkably, Park survived the ordeal without injury, while his mother sustained a back injury. This sheer luck involved in his survival made me admire the force of fate that seemed to guide Park's life. From his student years, Park demonstrated a distinct interest in military affairs, a passion that set him apart from his peers. Although Korea was under Japanese colonial rule at the time, Park did not harbor resentment towards the Japanese invaders. On the contrary, when the Japanese military conducted drills in his village, his admiration for military life only grew stronger. His reverence for Napoleon, whom he considered a model figure, further fueled his interest in the military. Park's education in school, indoctrinated by Japanese militarism, only deepened his commitment to his interest in military. During his time as class president from grade 3 to 6, it was reported that he frequently resorted to physical violence, slapping nearly every student in his class for obedience. This authoritarian style would later manifest in his leadership as the president. Perhaps due to his admiration for Japanese militarism, in 1944, Park joined the Japanese military and fought in northern China, carrying out brutal, inhumane orders as a part of Japan's imperialist expansion. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Park returned to Korea, stripped off his military uniform, and destitute. After Japan's defeat, the United States, seeking to establish South Korea as a bulwark against communism from the Soviet Union in the north, welcomed former officials from the Japanese Empire onto the military. This allowed Park to rapidly rise through the ranks and eventually becoming a lieutenant. However, the majority of South Koreans were living in dire poverty at the time. The country's GDP per capita was only $79, and the frequent famines left many starving to death. The governments under Min Ray and later regimes failed to alleviate the suffering, allowing corruption and incompetence to thrive. Both the general population and the military grew discontented with the government. And Park, sensing an opportunity, decided to exploit this discontent to seize power. The final catalyst for Park's coup was his impending retirement from the military, which threatened to bring attention to his past crimes, his involvement in Japan's invasion, and his role as an accessory. Faced with this reckoning, Park chose to orchestrate a coup and usurp the highest authority. The coup itself was disorganized and filled with flaws, but perhaps it was the moment in South Korea's history that tilted in Park's favor. The deeply corrupted Ray administration sparked widespread anger, and coups succeeded, marking the beginning of his epoch, an era defined by rapid development, corruption, economic growth, civil rights struggles, sovereignty issues, and dictatorship. The South Korea that Park inherited was in hazardous condition. It lacked economic strength, political stability, and basic social order. The population even tried to escape from South Korea to North Korea, which at that time seemed prosperous and unified under the communist reign, a notion that seemed absurd in today's world. As the leader who had come to power through a military revolution, Park's government had no legitimacy from the beginning, and thus he needed a strong justification to the public in order to win their support. The solution was crystal clear: ensure that South Koreans would no longer suffer from famine and achieve financial stability. Economic development became Park's primary focus. Yet, starting from nothing, the question arose: where would the capital and fund to rebuild the nation come from? South Korea was impoverished and had little to offer. Park, however, had an astute vision. He negotiated with Japan for war reparations, securing $300 million in compensation. This initial funding was insufficient, so Park also sought to bolster South Korea's economy through international trade and by fostering large domestic corporations. Despite all these efforts, more funds were still needed. Hence, what was the most valuable source in the world? The answer is human life. Park recognized that the United States was struggling in the Vietnam War and proposed sending South Korean troops to fight in place of Americans to reduce American casualties, a suggestion that the U.S. readily accepted in exchange for South Korea's economic aid. With the final pieces in place, Park's miracle on the Han River began. Through the sacrifice of national dignity, freedom, and the lives of young South Koreans, the country embarked on a path of rapid development, with skyscrapers rising like bamboo shots after a rainstorm on the banks of the Han River. This became known as the Miracle on the Han River in the history. The subsequent story of Park's reign was one of a man shaped by his militaristic upbringing in the shadow of the Japanese Empire, who resisted the democratic tide that swept throughout South Korea in the 1970s. As the nation's democracy movement grew, Park's government violently suppressed dissent, branding the pro-democracy protest as a threat to national development. As Park became increasingly extreme and volatile, his ultimate downfall became at the hands of his closest confidant. After Park's iron-fisted rule, South Korea transformed from a developing country into a developed nation, and his contributions cannot be overlooked. But at what cost? The life of South Korean soldiers lost in Vietnam? What about the humiliating history of Japanese colonial rule and the erosion of national dignity? Perhaps a simple soldier focused solely on obeying orders would not have considered such matters. After all, the military's duty is to carry out commands, but Park, a man who had risen from the remnants of the Japanese Empire, ruled South Korea with absolute power. As the president, no one gave him orders anymore. He ruled with a violent yet highly efficient hand, and while his methods may have been outdated in the face of the rising democratic ideals of the time, they undeniably brought about economic success. Issues like the oil crisis or economic recessions seem easily solvable under his dictatorship. Park was fortunate to have appeared at a time when South Korea desperately needed some absolute leadership. Yet he was also unfortunate, as the very people he had helped shape into a modern, prosperous nation were the ones who later opposed him with more advanced ideas of democracy. These were the same people whose sacrifices helped created the Miracle on the Han River. Thus, whenever South Korea faced hardship or crisis, the people and the public will inevitably remember their controversial president, Park Chung-hee. Thank you for your listening. This is my channel, Through the Lens of History. See you next time.